Hey Globetrotters, it is day number, what is it, day number 3, two or three, I don't know, 2 or 3, and hope you are having a good time at home with your family. I decided that I need to read to somebody, because I usually read to lots of people at school, and I don't get to read to people now. So I picked one of my favorite books, and I'm going to read a little bit of it to you each day. It's my favorite book, and I don't think I've read it for a while. It's called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and it's one of my most favorite books ever of all time. So I'm going to read it to you, a chapter a day, and we'll see how far we get. So I have to read it on my computer because I left my paper book at school, so I can't go get it. So I'm going to read it from my computer. So chapter 1 is called Here Comes Charlie. These two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket, and their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. I'll show you the pictures. That's them. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket, and their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. That's them. And this is Mr. Bucket, and this is Mrs. Bucket, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again? He's very pleased to meet you. The whole of his family, the 6 grown-ups, count them, and little Charlie Bucket live together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. Look like that. Now, this house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only 1 bed. And the bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired they never got out of it. Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine slept on this side, and Grandma George and Grandma Georgina slept on this side. And Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie slept in the other room upon the mattresses on the floor. And in the summertime, this wasn't so bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house or even one more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory where he sat all day long at a little bench and he screwed the little caps onto the tops of the tubes of the toothpaste after they'd been filled. But a toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money. And poor Mr. Bucket, no matter however hard he worked and however fast he screwed on the caps, he was never able to make enough to buy even 1/2 of the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a little bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same thing, everyone at least could have a second helping. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them, the 2 old grandfathers and the 2 old grandmothers and Charlie's father and Charlie's mother and especially little Charlie Bucket himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible, empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all. And although his mother and father often went without their own share of lunch or supper so that they could give it to him, he still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. Now, the one thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Walking to school in the mornings, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled up high in the shop windows, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, and his mouth would water like mad. Many times a day he would see other children taking big creamy candy bars out of their pockets and munching them greedily, and that, of course, was pure torture. Once a year, on his birthday, Charlie Bucket got to taste a little bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion, and when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with 1 small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned, and he would treasure it as though it were a bar of solid gold. And for the next few days, he would only allow himself to look at it, but he would never touch it. And then at last, when he couldn't stand it any longer, he would peel back a tiny bit of the paper wrapping at one corner and expose just a tiny bit of the chocolate. And then he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow the lovely sweet taste to spread all over his tongue. And the next day he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and so on. And this way Charlie could make his 10-cent bar of birthday chocolate last more than a month. But I haven't told you about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything else. This thing for him was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows or watching other children munching creamy candy bars right in front of him. It was the most terrible, torturing thing you could imagine, and it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary, enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there has ever been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. It had huge iron gates leading into it and high walls surrounding it and smoke belching from the chimneys and strange whizzing sounds coming out from deep inside of it. And outside the walls for half a mile around in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day, on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly. And he would hold his nose high in the air. And he would take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous chocolatey smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell. Oh, how he wished he could go inside that factory and see what it was like. Well, tomorrow we'll do chapter 2. So today, have an awesome day. Listen to your mom and dad, do your packet work, have some fun, eat healthy food, watch some TV, read a book, and pet your cat or dog. Bye.